And now, the survival show that once survived opening a jar of pickles with one hand. In this episode, we sit down with Daisy Luther from organicprepper.ca. She's going to tell us how to overcome poverty and not kill your kids with canning. Very important stuff. Howdy and welcome to In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. This is episode number 224. I'm your host, Aaron, and you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Daisy, welcome to In the Rabbit Hole.
Hello, how are you today?
I am doing fantastic, and I'm excited to talk to you because we're going to get into a topic that I'm a naughty prepper and have not paid a lot of attention to for a very long time. And I think canning has been on my mind for a while. I dabbled with it many years ago and then just got busy. And for me, it wasn't as exciting as things that go boom or all those other tactical type stuff. So I kind of fell off the wagon with it. But recently, a friend handed me an amazing jar of blackberry jam his wife had canned, and it made me think I need to revisit this. So I'm really excited to talk to you about this today. But first, who is Daisy Luther? How did you get into, what got you into preparedness?
Abject poverty. When my first daughter was born, her father lost his job about a month after her birth, and we had no money. We were very young, and while we were waiting for unemployment to kick in, and while he was searching for another job, we had nothing coming in for about 2.5 months.
Oh, wow.
So we were flat broke. We didn't have money to go to the store and buy a whole bunch of stuff to see us through. And I had that Scarlett O'Hara moment where I'll never be hungry again. And I shook a carrot at the sky. There was no carrot, but it was that kind of thing. And I decided I would never have an empty pantry again, because now it wasn't just my husband and myself. There was a little baby involved.
Right.
So we needed to be more prepared so that we could take better care of her.
See, now that is a really interesting story because it's usually something, zombies or the collapse of an economy, something larger in scale that gets people into it. So that's a really interesting story that it was, wow, things really do go wrong. And when you go wrong, suddenly you realize how important food is.
Yes.
So, wow, okay.
And, really the most likely disaster to happen to all of us is a financial one. No matter how much money you have, there's always some way that you can lose it. Maybe the primary breadwinner loses his job, or maybe someone in the family is very ill and insurance doesn't cover everything. And the next thing you know, you have a second and third mortgage on your house to take care of medical costs. Medical bills are the number one cause of bankruptcy in the United States and foreclosures. So really, financial disasters are probably the most likely for everyone.
So for you, because canning's not usually what people jump to first. So you're in a situation where you want a well-stocked pantry. I assume it started with gardening. Where did that begin for you?
Honestly, it started buying things on sale.
Okay.
And just stockpiling with things from the store. But I became very interested in health and wellness, and actually used to do a little bit of freelance work in that sector. And I wanted to provide better food. I wanted better things on my shelves than, just the cans of cheapo green beans that you get at the grocery store that come from heaven knows where and have been sprayed with heaven knows what.
Uh-huh. Okay. So from there, where did this go for you?
Well, I didn't start canning for quite a few years. I mean, there were several years that all I did was stock up from the store, buy as much as I could when things went on sale, kept things really organized. And that saw us through numerous rough spots. That saw us through the time after my girl's father passed away and after I lost a job as a single parent. So being able to have some supplies on hand means that you can get by on very little money. So at that point, I wanted to work from home because I felt like my kids needed me at home as opposed to working 10 hours a day to make enough money for taking care of a family by myself. So, I began blogging and experimenting, and canning was one of those experiments, but I absolutely loved it.
Mm-hmm.
And quickly it became part of our lifestyle.
So when you were starting out and even before you got into canning, what were the biggest obstacles you ran into with just trying to buy and store food?
Money. It always goes back to money.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's the most likely cause of disaster for most people. And it's also the thing that keeps them from preparing for a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
The lack of money can make it really tough.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So, and as you get into canning, I think with me, it was a little bit of just fear out of just doing it wrong. And I don't know, giving myself botulism, or worse, giving my wife botulism. In the beginning, is that the fear that you had? And how did you, where did that journey go for you with that?
I was okay with water bath canning, like making jam. That wasn't scary. But when I moved on to pressure canning, I would say my biggest fear was that I was going to blow up my house.
Yeah.
I was terrified. I wouldn't do it when the kids were at home because I thought if there's an explosion, I don't want them to see me lose an arm.
Oh my God, that's so horrible.
So I put the dog outside and, locked the cat in another room. And I managed to do it successfully. And I have all of my digits and limbs. So, once you do it, then it's not that scary.
Right. So have you ever blown up a pressure cooker?
No,
Okay.
no, that's really unlikely. Honestly, if those things happen, it is generally because you do something really stupid, or you have very old equipment. And by really stupid, I have heard of people who take a blazing hot canner that has been at, 15 pounds of pressure for 2 hours, and they dunk it in a cold sink because they want it to cool off sooner.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're kind of asking for trouble when you do something like that. Or they don't check the little valve and make sure it's not blocked, and then the pressure builds up inside. And checking the valve literally takes 2 seconds. You hold the lid up, you peek through the hole. If you can see light, you're good. If you can't, you need to poke something through that.
Simple enough.
And it's that simple.
So does that hole get clogged often? Or is it just like one of those things
very
you just
uncommon.
have to...
The only time it gets clogged, sometimes when you're pressure canning, the contents of your jars will sort of bubble over into the water. And that doesn't mean that the contents of the jars are bad or that it hasn't sealed, but some of the food particles can kind of get up in there, as the steam is releasing. Mm-hmm. So occasionally you get a little bit of stuff up there, but it doesn't usually clog up while you've got pressure going, because the pressure, it's just too much pressure pushing it through. But if it's already clogged after you, or before you start, that's when you can run into a problem.
Okay. So, I mean, we all know food storage, hugely important as preppers, but there's a lot of off-the-shelf products, and there's a lot of just bulk buying you can do and just sort of set it and forget it without the expense or anything else of getting into canning. So I guess why invest the time and energy in getting into canning?
I am a foodie. Mm-hmm. I really like good food, and I like organic food. We don't eat food that has chemicals and pesticides and things like that, because I feel that it's really, really unhealthy. So I can this stuff myself because I want to know for sure what is in these containers. I also have a child with a lot of food sensitivities. The FDA doesn't really watch out for things like using other names for chemicals like MSG or additives, I should say. They don't really clamp down on that. In fact, there are, I believe the last time I read about this, 178 different names for MSG. The same thing with high fructose corn syrup. That is something a lot of people are trying to avoid. Well, now that's listed as natural sweetener. So all of those things that I want to avoid, it's really difficult to do if somebody else prepares the food. Right. So I can make a jar or a dozen jars of soup of some sort. I know exactly what's in it. It takes me maybe 3 or 4 hours to do that, but that is a dozen home cooked meals for the future.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where do people begin? Where if somebody wanted to get interested in canning, where do you recommend they start?
Jam. It is easy, it's fast, it's instant gratification.
Okay. If it's jam, we're doing what, water bath canning,
Yep.
and then where do we go from here?
Well, water bath canning isn't nearly as intimidating. So that's why I always recommend that first. Some people like to dive right into the deep end, but water bath canning is pretty easy. If you can boil water, you can can something in a water bath because it is as simple as putting your jars together, assembling your product in your jars, putting the lid on, well, wiping the rim, put the lid on, you put it in the water, you make sure it's submerged, and then you boil it for 15 minutes or however long the recipe calls for.
Okay.
And that is honestly all there is to it. So it's super easy.
Okay.
And once
And
you have success at that, then you're a lot more comfortable trying something a bit different.
okay. All right. That makes sense. And so what is something a bit different?
Well, if you want to stick to the water bath canning, I don't really recommend pickles, although a lot of people say pickles are super easy. I am just a bad pickle maker. I have like a few recipes that are pretty much no fail for me, but it took a long time to come upon those recipes. And what people have to remember wherever you live, your environment is going to cause different canning conditions. So, something that works really well at a certain elevation and humidity might not work as well at a different elevation and humidity. So, yes, it'll be processed safely, but your results may not be as tasty or the texture that you want.
Oh, that's really interesting. And are there ways to easily account for that, or does it start to just become difficult to try to adjust?
Yeah, there definitely are all sorts of different methods that you can use, and a lot of it's trial and error. You can have the best recipe book in the whole wide world. You can have a canning Bible on your bookcase, but there are always going to be things that you have to adjust. And sometimes that's just for personal taste or food sensitivities. You know, maybe there is a spice that your family absolutely detests, or you have a family member that has an allergy. So you're always going to tweak this just a little bit.
Mm-hmm. What are all the different types of canning, at least the major ones that are out
The
there?
only two that I recommend are water bath canning and pressure canning.
Okay.
You will read all sorts of stuff about dry canning. This is not something I practice because I am just not 100% convinced that it's safe. I do follow the USDA guidelines for my canning. I don't can things that they say are unsafe because there are so many other ways to get these foods. It's just not worth the risk to me.
Oh, okay.
So you'll see a lot of people canning things like butter or milk, you know, like a soup that has a creamy base.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't recommend it because the USDA doesn't recommend it.
Okay.
You know, and that may sound like a cop out. It just seems like it's not worth the risk. Now, if there's something that you want to make, because you can preserve your own recipes by canning them, but if there's something you want to make that has an ingredient that shouldn't be canned, all you have to do is leave that out. So, for example, if there is a recipe that has kind of like a gravy with a thicker sauce, all you do is you can it in the liquid, and instead of thickening it before you process it, you can it, and then when you're heating it up, you drain the liquid off, you mix a little flour in to make your gravy or thicken your sauce, and then it just thickens up as you heat it up.
Okay. So a total novice at this. So what is the issue with canning butter or milk, or so what is that about?
You know, it's hard to explain really because I don't 100% understand it. I know that the USDA does a lot of testing and they have different foods that they test numerous times after they put it through rigorous canning. And occasionally there are foods that crop up that have the botulism germs. And when that happens, you know, obviously the food's not safe. Now, it doesn't happen every single time. It might happen once in 100 times, once in 1,000 times, but if you can't be guaranteed that it's safe, it's just not worth the risk of feeding it to your family. And botulism, it mimics the symptoms of stroke. So you may have paralysis on one side of your body, a blinding headache. Your speech may begin to slur. And the scary thing is, not only is it potentially deadly, but if it doesn't kill you, those side effects, they may never go away. So imagine feeding your child something that you canned, and for the rest of that child's life, it's like they had a stroke when they were 3 years old and they're dragging one side of their body. I know that sounds like a horrible scare tactic, but that's exactly how serious it is.
Okay. I gotcha. Serious. That's some serious stuff. And I guess I want to circle back to the botulism thing in a bit, but we'll be back after this quick break. Things are pretty quiet in the gun community right now. There's no crazy laws coming out or big new calls for gun control. And gun owners like myself are feeling pretty safe and pretty good about things right now, pretty optimistic. But you never know when the next gun-grabbing bonanza is going to start driving prices sky high and inventories crazy low because every Tom, Dick, and Harry decides that's the moment they need a gun, right? Now, we're really big on skills over gear around here. But sometimes pieces of gear just can't be beaten. And that's where a gun fits into your preparedness plans. This usually brings up where to get the best deal with the least BS, because gun buying can be just a headache. You should try martinarmory.com. They were founded with a simple goal: to make buying a gun simple and affordable. And instead of carrying thousands of different guns, they only carry 25. This is kind of crazy, but it allows them to focus on providing the most popular guns on the market at the very lowest prices. Now, for a limited time, ITRH listeners get a little something extra. You get free shipping. Simply go to martinarmory.com, pick out a gun, and enter the promo code RABBITHOLE at checkout. Again, that's martinarmory.com. Enter the promo code RABBITHOLE at checkout. Listener, do you get at least $3 a month worth of value out of ITRH? You should see what we do for the Roving Horde Armada members. Check it out today by visiting ITRH.net. Members get access to episodes a day early, access to monthly virtual and in-person meetups in some areas, an invitation to the secret ITRH Armada Facebook group so you can chat about survival all day long with like-minded people. Access to every episode ever produced by ITRH. That's right, all the way back to the beginning, including one that was never aired. And those are just a few things you get with your membership when you sign up and become part of the ITRH Roving Horde by going to ITRH.net. Again, that's ITRH.net. Where do people usually get hung up with canning?
They either don't. Okay, that botulism, it can happen with either type of canning. One way that they mess up is they water bath can something that's supposed to be pressure canned. To kill off botulism, it has to be at a higher temperature than the boiling point. So that's why you have to can it under pressure, because that's the only way you can reach that higher temperature in the internal core of your jars. So that's probably the number one thing. And you hear lots of folks, here's a myth that I like to dispel frequently. Well, my grandmother just boiled it for 3.5 hours and none of us ever died. And, it's great that you never died and you never got botulism. But if you know better, why would you ever risk that?
Absolutely.
Now, another way that people mess up is if they're pressure canning, they don't leave it in the canner for long enough, because it has to be in there for a certain amount of time that has been studied and restudied. And this amount of time, it's different with different food products, but this amount of time means that the botulism cannot survive this processing. So they maybe don't leave it in long enough, or they don't get it to a high enough pressure.
Is botulism the main concern here or the only concern? Are there other things, bugs,
There are other
weirdness,
ways, like your food can
contaminants?
spoil if the jar doesn't seal properly. That's usually not botulism. It's like another, like it could be basically any type of food poisoning. But
Okay.
botulism is the biggie. It's the one that's the most likely to kill you. Botulism
Okay.
thrives in a moist, oxygen free environment. Just about everything we can is moist because, if it's honestly all of it, because you add water to things that don't have water and things that actually have water, the water comes out and makes like a cooking liquid.
Hmm.
So you've got that moist environment. And once the jar is sealed, then there's no oxygen in there.
All right. So you're creating just by the very nature, and until you add the heat and pressure, you're basically creating a perfect environment for botulism.
Exactly.
Huh. Wow. Yeah. I guess it sounds like botulism is actually pretty easy to get
It
around.
is.
As
You just got to follow the directions.
all right, all right. So it's safe. Just follow the directions and don't go off and do crazy things. What does it usually cost to get into canning? Like somebody wants to go out and start fiddling with it tomorrow. And I guess we could start with water bath canning and then move into pressure canning. But to start with water bath canning, like what is the cost?
Water bath canning is dirt cheap. It's hard to put a figure on it, but there are so many people that say, "Oh, I'm going to make jam," and they make it once, and then they sell their canning pot at a yard sale for $5. I have probably a dozen water bath canning pots that I pick them up at yard sales because why not? They're only $5, and I know they'll get some use. I may have a problem. An intervention could be necessary, but you can almost always find those secondhand. Jars, I recommend that you get a name brand jar like Ball or Kerr because a lot of the cheaper jars have things in them like lead that you don't really want touching your food. Other jars will shatter under pressure because they're cheaply made, and lids as well. Sometimes cheaper lids, they just don't seal and they have a higher failure rate. So
Mm,
you can get a dozen jars at Walmart or Target or something like that for less than $10.
okay.
Even buying a water bath canning pot brand spanking new is less than $30.
Hmm. Okay, so you can be into this for under $50.
Absolutely. Now,
Okay.
pressure canning is more expensive because of
Mm,
the device that you have to have. There's a wide range of prices for pressure canner. I have always used a Presto pressure canner. I really, really like that one. It's about $70 or $80, really depends where you buy it. So it's not outrageously expensive. The
hmm.
thing you have to remember with those is that the rubber gaskets and the little dial that goes on top will eventually go bad, but you can buy the replacements for those and continue using the same pot. You can buy the replacements on Amazon fairly inexpensively, so I try to always have some spares on hand. You can get something like that, or you can go all the way up to the All American canner, which is like the Cadillac of canners. It doesn't have any gaskets or anything on it that's ever really going to break. So, you've got it forever once you have it.
Oh, wow.
But that one is closer to $300. So, if
Okay.
you don't know if you're going to like it, I recommend that you start with a less expensive one.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that sounds like a real serious investment.
It is.
Getting up in there. Okay. What else are the supplies needed for somebody? Like once they get into pressure canning, is there anything else they need?
These kits, they come with all sorts of little gadgets. Most of them I have never ever used, and they're probably just sitting loose in a drawer somewhere, and I wouldn't be able to find them if I tried. The only two accessories that I have ever used are like a canning funnel that has a base that is the right size to fit inside a jar, and it just sits on top of the jar so that you can pour stuff in without holding the funnel.
Okay.
So there's that. And a jar lifter, which looks almost like a pair of tongs, except at the bottom it has a place where you can pick up jars.
Hmm.
And those are really good, like if you're putting a jar into a boiling water bath or taking it out of a steaming hot pressure canner. But the other stuff, don't waste your money.
Yeah, all right. It's like those late night kitchen gadget infomercials. It's like,
Yes.
you'll never use this. Except that zucchini shredder thing. That my wife uses a lot.
That thing is really cool. I have one of those
It
still.
is. It's and it's fun as long as I don't have to be the one to use it.
Right.
So this may be a stupid question. I've seen this done a few times, but why would somebody can dry goods like beans? And I ask this because I it's a bit of a leading question. It's more than a bit of a leading question. It is a leading question because I had an issue with bugs a while back getting into my rice and things like that. But I guess the question is, I've also seen it. I'm like, why would you do that if you didn't absolutely have to? So canning can be used for more than just soups and things like that. So why would somebody do that?
Right. I have never dry canned in my entire life, so I may not be the right person to ask this question to. Generally, the reason people do it is to try to extend the shelf life, to try to keep out the bugs, because those are a problem basically anywhere you might live. So those are the two reasons that people do it. But I don't really think it's like the best use of your time and resources, because for every quart jar or whatever size you're using, you're going to be using a lid, which costs money every single time. It is such a small serving, unless maybe if you're just a single person and you're only going to be cooking for yourself, it might be more reasonable. I just tend to put things away in bigger quantities than that. And it just seems like a lot of work when you can just seal it in a Mylar bag and put it in a bucket.
Okay, so that makes more sense. So you're better off if you're trying to store dry goods, it's use the Mylar bags, use some sort of vacuum sealer.
Yeah, that's what I do. I know that there are people who swear by dry canning. I just don't.
Yeah, that seems like an added expense. And I guess if you were really concerned about rodents or something chewing into things and you just wanted the metal part of it, I guess that would make sense, or the glass part of it.
Jars are heavy. Where are you going to put all that stuff? If you are using quart jars to put back, let's say 50 pounds of flour, because a lot of people buy things in bulk quantity like that, where do you put all those jars? That's a lot of jars.
That's a big pantry.
It is.
And I guess to go back to gadgets and equipment for just a moment, I see the Tattler commercials, reusable lids. Is that a late night infomercial, or are those actually a really good product? And why are they?
This kind of goes the way of dry canning for me. I really don't like them. I have found that they have a high failure rate. There are other people who absolutely swear by them. So it's really one of those things. I wouldn't suggest anyone go out and buy, dozens and dozens and dozens of these without trying it first. If you try it and it works well for you, more power to you. But you know how the ads say they last forever. They don't last forever. They will last a few seasons, but they're not an indefinite supply.
Oh, okay. And for preppers, that's a really important point.
Right.
Okay.
I just stock up on lots of those little flats. I mean, and when I say lots, I mean thousands. And I try to store them carefully so that they'll last longer.
Well, you're actually making canning sound much more simple than I thought it was going to be.
A lot of people get scared off.
Yeah, well, I think I have a tendency to overcomplicate things and get obsessed with the gizmos and gadgets. And so I'm like, no new hobbies because I'm just going to spend a whole bunch of money on it. And so I'll have a tendency to not deeply examine things. You're making it sound super easy. And I guess that makes sense. You are, after all, an author of the book, The Prepper's Canning Guide. So tell us a little bit about your book.
Actually, it's exactly what you said. I tried to make it really easy. It's written in a very friendly conversational tone because there are so many things out there that make it sound like it's absolutely terrifying. I mean, our earlier talk of botulism, if that hasn't scared everybody off by now.
Yeah.
Yes, there are risks, but it doesn't have to be absolutely terrifying. It doesn't have to be something where you require all sorts of gadgets. It can be very basic, and it can be a great way to preserve things you get on sale, things you grow in your backyard.
Yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense. I know that's more and more, and I think my wife and I are finally in the position in our new house where we're getting ready to start a garden here. And that was another big thing, because it's like, as that grows, and it's how do you preserve that? And previously with the last project, it was all livestock. It was all chickens and rabbits, and I'd gotten pretty good at storing, at least in the short term, the amount of chicken and rabbit that we were producing, and eggs are a much more self-sustaining nugget of deliciousness than most people would think, since we have a tendency to store our eggs in the refrigerators here in the States. So that's interesting, and that does solve that problem. And I have a good friend who's running into that now, where he's actually got an overabundance of production, is like giving away things.
I'm a really big fan of what I like to call kitchen sink recipes. So there are quite a few recipes in the book that are very wide open as far as ingredients are concerned, so that you can use up whatever you have on hand, like different kinds of chutneys and things like that. Because at the end of summer especially, you've always got like a handful of green beans, a couple of peppers, an abundance of something else, but just things that you need to make a mishmash out of.
So your book is your book more than just a canning guide? It's also, there's recipes and stuff in there. Tell us more about what's in there.
So there are, of course, there's a jam section, because I always recommend that. There is also a set of instructions for making jam without any pectin. It's like a very old-fashioned method. Then it moves into just your basic fruits and vegetables. And really, after the initial, this is how to do it, it's charts. Because, I mean, how many times can you say, okay, this is how you can corn, and this is how you can peas, and this is how you can beans? Because it's all exactly the same. The only difference is the times and the pressure. Then it goes into meals. It goes into soups and stews, sort of like casseroles. I don't know if you'd really call them casseroles, but like jambalaya and things like that. You just add like the rice and the ingredients that shouldn't be canned at serving time.
That's cool. And I know your book is both in paperback and Kindle, which is awesome. I'm a big fan of Kindle. But you do more than just talk about canning. You have a whole prepper blog, the organicprepper.ca. Tell us more about your website and what people can find there.
On my website, I try to write a lot of basic how-tos, but I also like to relate preparedness to current events, because I think it's really important to watch the things that are going on around us so that we can really guide our preparedness a little bit more based on the things that are happening. So you'll find a lot of current events on there.
Really neat stuff. And again, that is the organicprepper.ca. Well, Daisy, I sure appreciate having you on today. You've helped steer me back towards canning. It's a lot less scary than I thought it was going to be. And I certainly look forward to talking to you again sometime.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Show notes, links to Daisy, and other resources can be found at intherabbithole.com/E224. Get free shipping on your next gun by buying it from martinarmory.com. and using the special code RABBITHOLE at checkout. Get more survival goodness and help support the show. Visit ITRH.net to become part of the Roving Horde Armada. That wraps up episode number 224 from the Lone Star State. Till next time, stay safe and sound.